Claro que I see it clear. Now we're standing in the sun. Mama, with that heart is beating like a new one. I hear in your silence, you're still running from a wall. Take shelter in my arms. Lay your head down and let me sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet. Liberate my soul. No more waiting for a cure. Now we no longer hurt. They can't stop you anymore. The light that you see now will guide your heart home. When you need a shoulder, lay your head down and let me sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet little lullaby, lullaby. And let me sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet little lullaby. I'll sing you a sweet
Perfect. Okay. 5:32, I'd like to call this regular Board of Education meeting to order. The first item of business this evening is the roll call. Trustee Goodrich, can you please conduct the roll call for those Board of Education members who are present?
Certainly, Madam President. Trustee Townsend.
Present.
Trustee Fields. Trustee Schindler. Trustee Gainsley. I'm here. Trustee Goodrich. Vice President Lee.
Here.
President Hawkins.
Here. We have 4 Board of Education members present. We know that Trustee Fields is on her way, and likely also trustee Gainsley, and trustee Schindler will not be joining us this evening. Next, we have on our agenda the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to invite the board and those members of the community who are present to join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, that takes us to the acceptance of the agenda. At this time, is there a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
Madam President, Vice President Lee, move to that the Board of Education accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Vice President Lee. Is there support for this motion?
Support, trustee Townsend.
Thank you. Supported by trustee Townsend. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that brings us to our first presentation this evening. And that presentation is community violence intervention, and that will be presented by Officer Derek Jackson. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Zachary Ross to introduce our first presenter.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to be able to have one of our wonderful community partners. I feel like this is a partner extension almost of YCS. Derek Jackson from the Sheriff's Department. He has been an amazing, amazing partner. He come on up. And he is here with the committee that have been really working to be proactive, to do some prevention work. And so I appreciate him and the committee for being here. And I want to specifically say thank you to Ms. Sharissa Allen for being the YCS representative on this committee. This is such important work, and so I appreciate you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am going to have Sharissa, Gail, and Jamal join me, and now I can go back over there and help scroll through at some point. As I just kind of do a quick introduction, this really is a community violence intervention team. We thought it was really, really important to present the 14 recommendations that the team came up with. And it was a community effort. I was fortunate enough to facilitate the group. Many people know me because of my work at the Sheriff's Office, but this is not a Sheriff's Office only or specific thing. I just happen to be the person asked to facilitate our group. And I will say the group is made up of individuals who have experienced violence, the loss of a young one to gun violence, who have committed violence, who went to prison for murdering someone. The group is made up of appointed and elected officials. It is made up of a really diverse group of people. We only came together originally because last summer we had 3 homicides of young people in our community in pretty close proximity to one another. And that first meeting was really just about grieving because we had been doing such hard work and we had lost young people again and again and again. But by the end of that meeting, someone suggested we should come back together again and talk about solutions. And so every week, minus a couple of cancellations here or there, but every week since last August, we've been meeting. And for many of you who are on committees, a weekly committee meeting sometimes can't be fun, isn't really impactful. This isn't a fun one for the sense of joy, but it is something that I would say is one of the most impactful things I've been able to be a part of, which is why I think the group is always full attendance and we show back up every single week. So before I walk you through the details around what the results of that group are, I just want to ask Ms. Sharissa, Ms. Gail, and Mr. Jamal to join me in here to talk just a few minutes about what this really means for them and why they were a part of the group. And I'm going to slide back here just to go through the slides.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Thank you for fitting us in your busy, crazy schedule at a time of year when I personally know what it's like to end your year and not even feel like you're breathing yet. So I deeply, deeply thank you for hearing us. Community violence recommendation and information is something that many of us have been meeting about and talking about and working with for 10 years or 11 years. I want to make a shout out to IPSA Community Schools because you were the first organization that would take us in 10 years ago so we could have community parties for some place for safe place for kids to go to. So I want to thank you. So I know your support and your care. The difference with this is as Derek and we are all going to share is there are 14 points, but the brilliant part of this is anybody can jump in any place. So it's numbered, as I used to like to say in the classroom, something just happens to be number one, but that doesn't mean it's the most important. It just happens to be number one as we numbered thing. Another wonderful thing is as we went through this, we were very passionate about getting students' input and getting students' ideas. We went to a different place. I know Sharisa and Jamal talked to some students, and then the team came to the Educate Youth Clubhouse on South Huron and talked to the students. And as this incredibly hard conversation happened, because some of the students knew at least 8 names that are listed in the packet, and Derek and some of the students had conversations along with Jamal about where the students fit into this and how people were doing this. The first thing that one of the students picked up on was, I think it's 1412, about a wall of remembrance. This is what? 12, thank you. This is a student who is presently going into his senior year. He lives in West Willow, and his idea, I feel very embarrassed showing this, but very proudful that I get the honor to do this. On his own, he came up with a mural of just having a black rose and the names of the people who had been shot and were, as the students say, forever 14, 17, whatever their age was. And to have the idea that this is how we could remember them. It was very much of, he was very convinced that this would be, I'm gonna age myself, but this would be sort of like a Switzerland where people, this would be a place where people would feel safe and just remember. So as I said, I'm talking on to Sean, but it was very clear that he was talking about this as just a universal safety place where people could heal through the grief of loss.
I'll just echo the part about the mural, Jamal Bufford, Washington, my brother's keeper. I'm passionate about the arts, music mostly, but also visual art. And we want this to be a youth-driven project so that it's not just put up in a safe space for the community to come and mourn and have communication with each other, but we want the young people to be a part of making this mural happen so they feel ownership over it. So we want to really workshop it out and have young people come, whether you're interested in art or not, whether you're passionate about it or not, we still want young people to be a huge part of this. And really quickly, this group, as Derek and Gail was saying, this is, we don't have ownership over this work. Though we are 12 or 14 people on this committee that have been working hard to get these recommendations to this point, we don't have ownership over this. This is really for the community. We need everybody's support. YCS, of course, the police departments, community elected officials, community leaders, those have been affected by violence, those who perpetrated violence. We really need everybody's to play a part in really ending this gun violence in our community. So thank you once again. And speaking on behalf of Washington, my brother's keeper leadership, we fully support this work.
Sharisa Allen, I represent the Ypsilanti Community School District sitting on this committee. And this is one meeting I actually love going to. I was in Atlanta heading to my son's graduation, and I stopped in the airport and I turned it on. So, and could only be on for about 30 seconds before I lost connection, but I actually enjoy it. I am looking through a social work lens. That's what my role is, a social worker. And I want to emphasize the importance of trauma-informed services, delivering trauma-informed services. We do not want to re-traumatize anyone. What I recognize and what we know for sure that this is just not this is just not the families. Okay, this is just not the problem of the family. It's the problem of the entire community. It's a domino effect. We go back to retaliation. The children go back to retaliation. They go back to what do we do? Should I start with what do we do? And their first line is retaliate. And we don't want them to do that. As Gail was saying, me and Jamal have had the pleasure of going up to the detention center and speaking with some young people there. And we recognize that they don't understand trauma and grief and what to do with it. So many times it's really just going back. They don't want to hurt anybody. They just in their feelings, in their emotions, going back, doing the same thing. And this goes back to the trauma informed, where we as a community have to find a way to hug on and love on these children, these young men, these young ladies who are committing crimes and committing crimes and committing crimes. One thing we did recognize in the detention center is many of them have been through foster care. Many of them, detention center has been their second home for whatever reason. But many of them don't feel like the community loves them. They feel like they're scarred, they're black mark or whatever the case may be. So I want us to really provide services from a trauma informed, and also we have people who can do the footwork that is not taught in a book. Okay, that is those people who are not afraid to walk up in the middle of a fight. They're not afraid to walk in the hood. They're not afraid to approach, and not in a confrontational mode, but they're not afraid to approach, knock on doors and go in houses and try to squash any beef that is going on. And so we need to also open our arms to them because they may have the title of a felon. And when we look at felon, we always think of the worst, but these are people who have actually been the terrorizers in the community at some point in time in their life, and they know that it's time to give back. These are people who have spent time in prison, many years, have done time that we couldn't even think of doing, and they know and understand the processes and the thoughts and all of that. And so they are the ones who can go in. So I'm asking that we open our arms to servicing, finding money to help them, pay for them, give them money to do what they need to do to eliminate the violence that is taking place. Thank you.
So Madam President and Superintendent, sorry, I'm standing behind you, but want to make sure we keep the presentation on Zoom. I'll just say that partly why we start with community voices is so that you get a sense of why we do this work from our various different seats. Obviously, coming from a law enforcement perspective and seeing the amount of violence, I carry this book with me all the time. This book has the name of every young murdered person since I started the job at the Sheriff's Office 14 years ago, and I'm on page 4 pages full of names. And so the report that you will see, the second to last page has every single name of every person in those years that have been murdered. And the reason is we want people to understand, like, this is why we came together to do this work. This is our sole focus. Not political, not grandstanding, not this, not that. It is only for saving lives. The real issue that we have seen over time is a lot of times people focus on violence and they think about these larger gun violence issues. Well, domestic violence using a gun is very different than street violence. Suicide by gun, very important issue, but very different than street violence. So our group tried to have tunnel vision around street violence in particular. And so when you see the 14 recommendations, we talk them through, That's why, that keep that lens that they are really about street level violence. And the reason is because, you know, if you give out gun locks as a, say, as a tool, that's a great tool, particularly if you're talking about accidental shootings or kids getting guns or suicide, right? But if you're giving out gun locks to folks who are having illegal guns and shooting on the streets, they're not going to use a gun lock. So the reason we had to stay very specific around that particular issue and learn was because we wanted to be able to make some of the changes. I'm just going to point to a few quick data points. So exposure to firearm violence approximately doubles the likelihood that a young person will commit violence within 2 years. Our mantra within our group has been, if you can predict it, you can prevent it. And so these data points really start to hone in on, if you see a young person who's been directly impacted by gun violence, you can start to predict it within 2 years. That's a pretty high number of a young person who may perpetuate violence in the future. So again, if we see a young person who's been in very close proximity to gun violence, one of the things that we can do is figure out a way to interject and intersect with that young person so they don't become the suspect the next time. Another quick piece is hospitalizations is recurrent, meaning if someone is a victim of a serious assault, the likelihood of them coming back is pretty high, right? So hospital violence for related injuries is recurrent, with hospitalization readmission rates for subsequent assaults as high as 44%. And this next one we highlighted because it's so significant, it's high as 20% for homicide. So again, a young person that goes into the hospital for a significant assault, a gun, a stabbing, or a violent physical assault, the likelihood of them coming back a second time is pretty high. And the likelihood of them becoming a victim of homicide is pretty high, right? So again, you can prevent it, you can predict it, or you can predict it, you can prevent it. Last one, I'll just ask you, just for the sake of time, to kind of put this in your mindset. If I asked you what percentage of shootings in Washtenaw County were retaliatory in nature, what would you say? Someone does something, I'm angry about it, and I retaliate. I heard someone say 70%, some have said 30, 80 to 85%. So we know that if someone is harmed by a weapon, a gun, there's an 80 to 85% of our shootings are retaliatory. Someone wants to get back at someone. So again, if we know these 3 data points, we can start to predict the likelihood of gun violence happening a second time. Why would we not intersect? And you at the schools, I'm sure you've seen, some of your teachers, I'm sure know, Elena and I have talked about some of these young people that have been victims. One point, a couple of years down the road, they become our next shooter or our suspect. Or we see an older sibling 5, 6 years ago who have been murdered or in the midst of this gun violence back and forth. And before you know it, they become the person, right? They are depressed. They become hardened. The neighborhood starts to treat them a certain way, so they respond a certain way. The whole purpose of this is looking at these data points and saying, if we did something, we could literally change this perspective in Washtenaw County. The number of shooters that we have is very, very small. We're not talking about a very large number of people, and young people in particular. We're not. It's a very small amount of people who are having major impact in our community. And if we could do something, just something, what might be the change in the trajectory? The reason we come to you, just like all of the other boards and commissions around the county, is just for education. The County Board of Commissioners was our first board we presented to. They did invest money to do a problem analysis and asset mapping. You'll see that's one of the recommendations. And they've directed all of their departments within county government to learn about these and to see where their department can plug in. So partly right now, we're just asking you to take this in, to hear us, and then think about what might the district do to really get on board with these 14 recommendations. I'm just going to go to one last slide. And so these are the 14 recommendations. There is a report that comes with it where you can read a lot more of the data. But Gail, Jamal, and Sharisa talked about a couple of these recommendations, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Number one is to set a clear goal and commit to saving lives by stopping violence. It sounds like just words on a screen or semantics, but when you make that a part of your core goal and value to stop violence, to commit to saving lives, you start to think a little bit differently about the role that you play. Sharisa mentioned hiring people that are violence interventionists or people who know how to do this work. That might be something where the district starts to really look at and invest in those particular individuals. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are really about identifying key people and places and putting things in to practice in those specific places and for those specific people. Jamal talked about it's a balance, and it really is, between some compassion and community building, but also with accountability, right? So there has to be some accountability. If someone has tried to murder someone else or has shot at one of your family members, there has to be some accountability for that. But we also have to have off-ramps. So before young people pick up a weapon, before young people decide to take that aggressive stance of shooting at someone or threatening someone like that, like Ms. Sharisa said, we do some trauma-informed approaches with them that help navigate for them to think differently about the role that they're playing in our community. We talked about number 11 a lot because this is the one that hits home for me and that the kids, I promised them we would always talk about. And it's to build a community center in Eastern Washtenaw County. For those who've been around for a while, you know, we've talked about this over and over and over. The kids will always say, there's nothing for us to do. We need something positive to do. The science will say, if you look at any place around the country that have attacked this issue of street violence appropriately, they have a safe physical space for families and kids to go to get off of the streets, but also to learn those skills, to also bring our communities together. So in Washtenaw County, the kids are dying for this. They have all kinds of ideas around locations and what we would do there. But the science and the young people are telling us we have to do this. And so although we've heard of 3 iterations of a community center that had funding, that had a pretty good plan, that failed in our community, now we're asking the question of why. And if we had a community center 15 years ago, we don't know for sure would have saved all these lives, but I have to imagine, based on where I was raised in the community center we had in Inkster, it took us off the streets. It got us connected with our neighbors in other parts of the community that we used to beef with. It gave us a connection to adults and somewhere safe. So I have to imagine at least one of those 4 pages, the individuals on there, might have had a different trajectory if we would have been able to do something like that. So it's not just about kids playing, it's about life-saving measures. The other one is to establish a grief and loss community response protocol. When you think about it as a school, if a young person dies of suicide or from a drug overdose, we often do assemblies. We get the social workers and the therapists to wrap around our student population. But what happens when one of our young people is murdered in the streets? Do we treat them the exact same way? Is there a protocol for that? And some would argue that sometimes that homicide and the ripple effects of the trauma and the ripple effects of retaliation and all the people that it brings in is even more impactful to the student body population than some of those other tragedies, because it ropes in and the waves hit everyone. 2 last components. The folks from Detroit who we were working with around this work, when they started to learn our community, they said, Derek, the disease of violence in the Ypsi community in Washtenaw County is deeper than the disease of violence in Detroit. What do you mean by that? Not that we have more. They said for 2 reasons it's deeper. Number 1, you're so geographically small. Everyone knows everyone. You can't get away from the violence. And we started to see that with some of the young people we were working with. Even if they have the mindset to do the right thing, even if we find them a job, even if the family wants to move, if they are still in Washtenaw County, that beef follows them. We had a young person that we got a job at the Walmart before it closed. First week on the job, he calls me and says, Derek, I can't work here. Why not? I just seen the family of the person that shot me. So again, we're so small, it's hard to get away from it. The other part that they say is we're so familial, meaning there are overlapping relationships amongst so many of us that when something happens to me, my cousin Celeste feels it, my friend Miss Zachary Ross really feels it like it happened to her. And so even if I don't want to retaliate, they feel and live on that trauma. And we don't have a way to deal with that in our community. So for those 2 reasons, we have some very unique challenges in Washtenaw County. And then the last one, and I'm going to mention it here because some of you in the room are already on this, but we wanted to have a community alert system, not like our Nixle that the sheriff's office sends out, but something specific for those people who have their hands in the soil, for the superintendent, for the principals, for the teachers in the classroom, because we want them to know when violence happens, here's what happened, here's where it's at, some of the brief details. Now do whatever you need to do to kick into action, a call to action. And I end with that one because it isn't just a sheriff's office thing or just a school thing or just a educate you thing. It really is all of us coming together. We do not say you have to do all 14, or you have to do for the school, do number 7 or number 5. Really, we're putting this out there for individuals, for organizations, and for schools and for government structures to figure out how do we do these. And then finally, the Council on Criminal Justice did something very similar as our process at the national level. And they released 10 points that if you do them now as cities and counties, you can impact violence right away. It just so happened when we finished that there were 10 of ours that were very similar to their 10. So you'll notice in the report, there's a little CCJ next to 10 of them. That's to let you know that this is also kind of national data and nationally approved in that work. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions. I know you have a long agenda, so we wanted to really be intentional, but we wanted to rush through some of these. And as we answer questions, I'm just going to put one last slide up for you to look at.
And the CCJ is on the second document that you have.
So these are the names. You see there's a new name today. I need to change that. That was actually about a week ago. There was another name that needed to be added. And then because this is the PDF and not the presentation, there's another name that's down in the bottom right that many of you around here may have known. And so our hope is that if we start to do some of these things now and not wait, we can stop people being added to these slides or being added to that book that I carry around. And so with that, Madam President, Superintendent, I'm happy to answer. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson, and a big thank you to your entire team for presenting to us today. Board, do you have questions?
No, I don't have a question. I have a comment. So I'm kind of glad I was able to arrive during this presentation because this idea was something that I was kind of present as well, just something along the lines of this, of some sort of resolution that I wanted to talk about, but it was going to be childhood trauma resolution. So it's going to be the same idea because it reflects everything that you guys are talking about, childhood things that are happening. So I think it was, I did kind of go together. So I just want to say I appreciate your presentation because that's idea. And that's something to talk about. I didn't kind of see that as your option, but I think that's a big thing in there as well. A lot of this from childhood, for things are happening. Their childhood develops into these kind of things that they're experiencing in this program that you guys are presenting. So thank you for that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Trustee Fields. Other board questions or comments?
My question, well, I'm just kind of looking at all of the names that are on the board, and I've attended several of these funerals. Being in this role not even a year, I've gone to 4 funerals for students. And I do agree that it is time that we really be proactive in this part. In this plan, I feel this is a very doable plan for our county. Of course, I would want to see us do even more than that. Dear Mr. Jackson knows my husband works in a detention center, and you know, he has had to become the father role for a lot of these students. And I would just hope that as a community that we really stay focused on what the end goal is for our children, and keep that in mind and make sure that there aren't any other agendas being considered when we begin to do the work. So I want to thank the entire committee for their help on this. And I would hope that we can begin the process of working through some things to see, you know, how we can work together as a community per se on trying to, you know, change the lives of our children in the community.
If I can, just 2 quick comments to that. You mentioned going to 4 of the funerals. There was a young person that said to us very loud and clear, he was a victim of a gunshot, a survivor of a gunshot, but he also has many young people that he's known, his friends who have died. And he said one of the most impactful things to change his life was Mr. Lockwood, who works in the detention center with your husband, showed up to one of the funerals of one of the young people. And he said, I never forgot that. A person that cared about me, an adult who I didn't think was really connected in, showed up to the funeral. So I want to just lift that up, that is very impactful, and our young people are watching us.
Yeah.
And so if you show up to the vigil or the funeral of someone that they love, that says a lot about you taking your personal time for that. They also notice when we're not there. And I'll give you an example. One of the young people asked me, how come when we do a vigil and you leave the teddy bears and the crosses and the candles out where that young person died, or where that person died, it gets cleaned up and it's gone. But if somebody gets hit on their bike, they leave the ghost bike there forever. Doesn't it seem different? Why do we treat people? This is a young person asking me, why do people get treated differently? And so I think when we think about trauma-informed practices and some of this work, we often sometimes think about the kid who was at the end of the gun as being this bad kid. I can just tell you, I've had many conversations with some of your students who will turn around and say, I can't believe that happened to them. Or even the person who had the gun, like, I can't believe they did that. Because we know it isn't about being a bad kid. It's a product of the circumstances, and it's fear. Young people will tell you they are fearful. And I think if we can't create the kind of community to help them feel safe, that is a failure on us, the adults, and not on the young people. So to your point, Trustee Thompson, I just wanted to mention that I think it's really, really impactful that you actually go to those funerals because the kids are watching.
Yes, Vice President Lee.
Now, this is a team of parents and just people in the community.
So it is, it's a team of people, some who are parents, but some who are, there's a person who went to prison for murdering someone. There's a person who watched a young person die in their front lawn. There's people like me who've been doing this work. And then the folks that you see, Ms. Sharissa, Gail, and Jamal, who kind of work in this space as well. And in the report on the last page, there also is a list of all the people that came together. Mayor Richardson from the city was the one who called us together originally, and who's been kind of leading us to, do some of this work as well. So it is I think, a pretty diverse group of community voices.
Okay, so you're just trying to grab hold to these kids before they get into trouble and get murdered.
So yes and no. I would say as you look at the 14 recommendations, they're pretty broad, right? And so there are things that can be done before, but there's also something like we're doing at the sheriff's office. So we took some of these recommendations and said, here's one of the things we want to do. It's called We Live. It is about going to the hospital bedside of a young person, or a person, I keep saying young person, but a person in general, who've been shot. If they survive, there's that golden window of opportunity. We know they want to retaliate. We know they're angry. How about we take folks who've survived, teach them how to do this work, put them at the bedside, and before that person ever gets out of the hospital, just like our great doctors will patch them up physically, we start putting them back together mentally and emotionally. So that's just one thing that we're doing, but the recommendations are very broad around what a school could do, or other government entities could do, or Educate Youth, or My Brother's Keeper. So at My Brother's Keeper, we're just starting these conversations to see, all right, where do we plug into these 14, and how do we make this a priority for us?
Yes. Trustee
Yeah.
Thompson.
I just want to really appreciate all of you. And I know that, even just having a meeting every week for a year is a ton of work. And I know that all of you do this work additionally outside of that. So I just appreciate the people who have come together and put this in. And I want to say that our board has, a lot of these young people who you see here, our board has grieved these young people here at this table as this group. And we have often said to ourselves, what can we do? Like it impacts the whole community. And, as you said, we're really a tight knit community, and it really hurts. And so I just can't appreciate enough how much work has gone into this, and to have some concrete recommendations that have come from this community group is so incredibly valuable, because it's finally an answer to that question, what can we do? So I think I speak for our whole board to saying that, like, we're very committed to supporting this work. I do think that was it number 13, the, protocol for response. That seems like something, and I know that we have some pieces of that in place, but it sure, that it really, I know, hits our students hard. And so that might be one of the first places for this board to act. And I would say that your group, if I were to now turn this into a question, would your group be willing to then work with us on that and help the protocol? Because I think, as you pointed out, it can't just be the schools, it needs to be the entire community. But I think we would, be really eager to hear the recommendations of, the young people and all the people involved in your group in terms of what that protocol looks like and what part of it we can support.
I'm turning to my partners in crime over here because I know.
I would like to say that there was a while, 10 years ago, we had something like this set up, and we've also had it very loose set up, so we get messages, and that means when these students come into organizations, or they come through my door or other doors, we are on the ground ready. And if My Brother's Keeper or 734 and Educate Youth are sharing the students, we can talk and I can quickly text Derek, and it's so yes, in very short. Teresa?
I was gonna say yes too, but I was, yes, trustee Gainsley, we can do this, but I was gonna add that when our student dropped to the floor in the gym, and then when our student was killed over in the area, there was a totally different response. And I was reminded by a student who called me at 6 a.m. and said, I'm just not going to school for the rest of the year. And I said, oh, but you are. And they said, no, Miss Allen, I'm not. I'm tired. And I said, and I get, I'm going into social work mode. I get it. It's been a rough year. And she said, no. You see, when he died, they were in the school, Miss Allen. They were in the school, a whole day of grieving. And then when he died, I don't know, maybe they sent somebody, but it wasn't the same. And Miss Allen, they both were my friends. I went to school with both of them. And they both left here before they were 20 years old. And that's not fair. And so I'm urging us, encouraging us to change our protocols. Death is death. It really is. No one asked for it. None of the teens. I don't care how rough and tough they may be. And as we read the Bleeding Out book, in one chapter, it really does break things down for us, the wannabes, the hustlers, the legacies, all of that. You'll have to get the book to understand. But it's serious that we must, as a school, we must put in place protocols and systems to address death in any form, because all of us, the community is affected financially. However we want to look at housing, they have to move kids, families, do some strategic planning so someone else isn't hurt. We all have to make a plan to make something happen and not re-traumatize, and understand what grief is to us is different to our young people.
So Teresa alluded to the book. If people are interested, one of the things we've been doing as a group is learning like a book club. It's called Bleeding Out by Thomas Abt, ABT. It is a great starting point foundation of what this work really means. So we're all speaking a common language using the facts, because we all come to this work in very different ways. So just because she mentioned, I wanted to share that. We encourage everyone to read that book.
Can you repeat the name again?
It's called Bleeding Out.
Okay.
Thomas Abt, ABT is his last name.
Trustee Goodrich, did you have a question or a comment?
Just a quick comment. Trustee Gainsley's commentary reminded me, I was going to say this at the end, but this ties in with, I just wanted to express my thanks to the district for the opportunity to take part in the comprehensive school threat assessment training. And that was really powerful. And I appreciate that our district has some of these systems in place to try to intervene as quickly, as early as possible. And there's so much about that system that is great. One thing I was
sitting with at the end was knowing that so much is beyond the locus of control of what we can do within our school walls. And so this, I'm really encouraged to hear about the work that all of you have been doing to bring in the additional supports to take this work out into our neighborhoods and to the families who need that support, because the district is doing some excellent work within our buildings, within our community here, but it really, all of this wraparound we know needs to be broader than that. So thank you all for the work that you're doing.
And you pointed out something that we haven't talked a lot about, but Alice, active shooter training, the school threat assessments, and this community work are three components that are intentionally play off of one another. And so thank you for recognizing that, because that is a larger community conversation we're having about all three of those. What happens when it's in your school, Alice? How do we identify it and red flag it and prevent it? School threat assessment. How do we move even further upstream? The community violence intervention work. So those three really do go hand in hand.
And if there are no other board comments, I guess I'll just end by not really with a question, but just a few comments, just to say, again, I deeply, deeply appreciate the work of this entire committee. This is not easy work. This is heavy. The violence has been happening for years, and I'm glad we are now just at the point where I feel like we've had different iterations of this, and having lived in this community for a number of years, and like Trustee Townsend, my husband has been at the detention center for 23 years, and to see the relationships that they have with these young people, and then they get released and they're in the community and they don't have the level of support that they need to be successful young adults, is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy for us as adults that we have failed these young people. And I take full responsibility for that, because I live in this community. And I talked to you, Mr. Jackson, we had a long conversation, and we need to do better. And I believe meetings are important. I believe coming together is important. But as I shared with Mr. Jackson, by the time I finish with my board service, if I have not done something significant, not that what I haven't done serving in this community on this board hasn't been significant, but this is preventable. The deaths are preventable. We have to do more. And I stand ready, and I know this entire team stands ready to step up, to do what is necessary, to partner, and to not just say we're here and available and wait. We want to be present, engaged, and active. We know that the viability of our community is intrinsically connected to the viability and the health of our schools. So this work is critical, and it's important, and it's necessary, and it might feel thankless, but you are doing the hard work. So I appreciate and thank you, and I hope this is one of many conversations to come. Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you.
Mhm. This now takes us to our second presentation for this evening. This is our preliminary budget recommendation that will come to us by Ms. Nyack. I will turn it over to Dr. Zachary Ross.
Thank you so much, Madam President. As Ms. Nyack is coming, we know that this is the time of the year in which we're preparing for two things. We've got 8 days left into this school year, so we to the end of this school year, and we start the new school year on July 1st. So Ms. Nyack will be starting with some of the amendments and then move into some of the recommendations for the 22-23 school year, reminding everyone of so many changes in ESSERS, and I know she's going to lift up that. And even with the numbers that we see here, there are still approvals that have come out even since this presentation that we've received from Michigan Department of Ed, which is a great thing. It just will impact, however, Trustee Gainsley, our audit. We know that all of it can't be used. It's over 3 years. And so we're in a different space as we're looking at numbers. Usually numbers in PREA is like one solid thing. And it has been, as the world changes and turns, depends on when these approvals come, as well as I know you've been getting the legislative updates about what our governor will approve for budgetary factor. So Ms. Nyack, take it away.
Good evening, board members, Madam President, Superintendent Zachary Alina Ross. Alina Zachary Ross. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to present you this final budget amendment. Like the superintendent said, this is our last opportunity to make any amendments, any changes. And believe it or not, we received approval for a grant last week. So we had to make sure we added that to our budget amendment because that money we had to use it by June 30th. So with that said, here is our agenda. You have heard me talk about how budget is a living document. I'll talk about the budget variances, the funds that I will present today that needs to be amended for the year end. Any questions you have? The first half of my presentation is for our ending the fiscal year 2021 and 22. After that, I'll recommend the initial budget for the fiscal year 22-23. As I said, our budget is a living document. The budget changes are made on the district financial software throughout the year. Sometimes because the district building needs are changed, sometimes because we receive grants, sometimes we amend the grants. Number of reasons we make those changes to the budget in our software. Anytime the budget is more, and anytime the expenses are more than what the previously approved budget is, we have to make an amendment, we have to present it to the board, have that approved accordingly. So we make various amendments during the school year. Some accounts pretty much remain the same throughout the year because historically we know what to expect from those, and some change multiple times or just once or twice. There are budget to actual variances. Now, you would ask why there are variances, because one of the biggest reason is our federal grants. We have large number of federal grants. Even without ESSER, we still had Title I, IDEA. Those grants did not align with our fiscal year. They don't go from July through June like our fiscal year. They go from July through September. It is very hard to predict how much of that entire budget we will use by June 30 and how much of that we will need for July through September. That's where you see the variances. Even if we have an accuracy of 95%, that means there is a variance of $4.2 million for our budget. So the goal always is to have the less variance as possible, but especially with these federal grants like ESSER, which are valid for 3 years, it is going to be very difficult, and that's one of the things that you will see in during our audit as well. This is, like I said, this is our last opportunity to make any changes necessary for our fiscal year 21-22. There are still some fiscal uncertainties. I'll give you an example. Summer school. We have ordered summer school supplies. We still have 2 weeks of summer school that falls under this fiscal year, and the rest of it falls under next fiscal year. How much of the supplies are going to be received by June 30th? How much I need to transfer into the next year? How much of the stipends I will pay out in this fiscal year, and how much will go into the next fiscal years? Things like that. There are many uncertainties. Anything we receive by June 30th will belong to this school year. Anything that doesn't will go into the next fiscal year. That's why it is very difficult to say, I will spend $300,000 on this year, or am I going to spend $150,000 this year? These are the funds that I would like to amend based on the changes that have happened during the school year. I'll be amending the general fund and the grants, food service, the debt fund, and the fund 29, or the school activities fund, where our schools do the fundraise and receive the money. With that said, here is the amendment. Second to the last column is the amendment that I'm proposing to the general fund budget since March. We have 4 types of funds coming in: the local revenue, the state revenue, the federal, where you will see the majority of changes. The incoming transfers is the money that we receive from the WISD. As you can see, there is a big change in the federal revenue. Does not mean we have lost any grant. It just means that we will be using the grants by June 30th. everything else will be moved into the fiscal year 22-23 or 23-24 based on what we have planned for each of our grants, which brings our total revenue to $84,407,289. Based on our plan and the funds received, here are the expenses that align with it. We have various types of, the basic programs is where we have instructional expenses, the added needs, the pupil support, the instructional support, general administration. One of the biggest change you will see is in the debt service from the bottom two. This is where we have paid off our Schneider Electric lease. We no longer will have any payments for the next fiscal year. So that was one of the goal, and we made our payment on June 1st, and we have saved about $845,000 for the district. Based on the revenue that we are expecting to receive and the expenses that are aligned with those revenues, we will be able to add about $494,000 to our fund balance. And that is just a projection as of now. As we go through the audit and once the audit is complete is when we'll have our final numbers. Next, I would like to recommend amendment for the food service fund. Some of the things, as you know, the rules keep changing, the funds keep changing, the reimbursement kept changing. So now we are expecting a local revenue of $295,000. The state revenue, where we get from the state breakfast or the lunch money. And the federal revenue is where we, as a CEP district, we ask for the reimbursement for every lunch and breakfast and snack that we serve to our students. So based on that, we are expecting $3.3 million as a revenue. Between the operations and the last year or the current fiscal year, we had fixed cost contract with Chartwell, and with our labor, this thing, we are expecting $3.2 million as our expenses. And we are expecting to transfer $126,000 to the general fund for the indirect cost, which makes our expenditures to be $3.3 million, which will allow us to add $8,429 to our fund balance. Next, we have the debt fund. We have two types of two debt funds, one for the Ypsilanti, one for the Valoran. First, I would like to go over the Ypsilanti debt fund. This year, we collected $7.2 million from the debt levy. We do 7 mils of a debt levy for the Ypsilanti. Based on that, we have 3 bonds that we pay. The annual payment for the bond was $7,038,108. We are anticipating that we will add $216,000 to our fund balance with a projected fund balance of $1.2 million. Next, we have a Valoran debt fund. The Valoran debt fund, we were able to collect $5.6 million. We had to borrow from the state bond loan fund $4.6 million to make the annual payment of $10,337,000. We have 2 bonds that are outstanding on the Valoran. The total payment of $10,084,455 will allow us to add $252,000 to the fund balance, which we are projecting it to be $831,000 for the next fiscal year. Last one is the Fund 29. Fund 29 is the student activities accounts, various student activities accounts throughout the district. These are the funds that are fundraised or donated for the school activities. We are anticipating about $125,000 as a local revenue for them. And pretty much whatever funds they generate, majority of the times they spend that money. So we are anticipating the same amount of expenses, which will allow our fund balance to stay the same for the while we close out the fiscal year. Any questions?
Trustee Gainsleigh.
Sure. I just have a moment. I want to take a moment of appreciation, if you'll allow it, Madam President, because I happen to have a bit of familiarity with how hard it is to spend federal money. We hear about all this ESSER funding and how it came to the schools, and that is wonderful, and we do appreciate it.
Mhm.
But spending $30 million in federal grants when they all come out at different times, they have constantly changing guidelines. They give you, hundreds of pages of guidance. Everything has to be 3-bitted out, all these different requirements attached to every single one of them. And so it's, there are districts that are going to end up giving back some of that money because they weren't able to spend it all in the correct way. So I just want to offer a huge appreciation to Ms. Priya-Nayak for making that happen. This is really incredible. So
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Other board questions or comments?
He's doing a great job.
I would like to add that we are one of the few districts that we have received our entire ESSER 3 application of $21 million with no questions asked.
Wow.
They have approved without even a single question. So that really makes it a big difference.
Any other board questions or comments? Thank you so much, Ms. Nayak.
Thank you.
This is
Um,
incredible news to hear,
Mhm.
to hear that we have excess and to hear we're paying off debt early. I
Mhm.
heard Trustee Townsend clapping. That's a big deal, right? That is something to celebrate, that we
it
are
is.
paying off debts sooner, because we know that this huge albatross around the neck of Ypsilanti Community Schools is that debt retirement payment. So anything we can do to free up money in our budget, or to bring more revenue into our budget, as good stewards of the district's resources, certainly makes us proud. And this is a good day. And I echo what Trustee Gainsleigh said. Although I don't intimately know how hard it is, I just know that hearing hundreds of pages and it has to all like that sounds like a Herculean task. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and to the entire team and Superintendent Zachary Ross.
Thank you. Next, we have the budget hearing. This is for our initial recommendation for the next fiscal year. By law, we have to have a budget hearing to adopt the budget before July 1st. So I would like to go over that and my recommendation to the board for the next fiscal year 22-23. So the purpose of the budget hearing, we have to comply with the Uniform Budgeting Act. We have to provide a summary of information and a proposed budget to the board so that the board can vote on it. Also, we can receive any input from the board and the public, so that the public is aware of what we are doing with all the funds that we receive throughout the year. There are parameters to the budget. We have to follow the Michigan Department's accounting manual. We call it a 1022. There are GASB standards, as well as there are generally accepted accounting principles that we keep in mind anytime we create a budget. Of course, the most important are our board policies that we follow along when we create a budget for the school system. As I said, it is a law. We have to put a notice of public hearing in the newspaper. Our notice was published on June 9th in Ann Arbor News. A budget hearing has to be held, and the governing body has to approve the budget before July 1st. The budget is available for anybody who would like to see during the school year at the administration building. You have heard me throughout each amendment I talk about. It is a living document. We make changes. Just because we are adopting this initial budget, it is not set in stone. As there are so many changes that we are so used to it, that there are so many changes that just keep happening every month, every day, every week, that we have to make our amendments based on that. And we try to make at least 2 amendments during the school year. For the next school fiscal year, I would like to present the general fund, which includes our grants, the food service fund, the debt retirement fund, and the Fund 29, or the student activities fund. The key revenue assumptions, making amendment to the last one, we didn't have to make assumptions because we knew pretty much what we to expect in the next 8 days. For the next fiscal year, we would have to make some assumptions so that we can make our budget. Foundation allowance increase of $435. That's what is expected for Governor Whitmer to sign. We will know more what she finally signs, when she signs. It could be June 30th, or it could be first week in July. But in the meantime, I have put an assumption of foundation allowance of increase of $435 per student. I'm assuming that our categoricals remain the same. When I say categoricals, I talk like our 31A funding or section 41 funding, the things that we get from a state aid to remain same as the previous year. We get our initial allocations for our federal funding, like Title I IDEA, like last week in May. So I have included those in this assumption, as well as based on what I'm anticipating to spend from our SR2, SR3 federal grants like SEEK, LEAP, IDEA, based on what I'm expected to finish the June 30th year and what would be a carryover for the next fiscal year. So those are my revenue assumptions. Thank you to our wonderful community who passed our homestead, non-homestead millage. We are able to collect 18 mills. So we are able to assume that we will, for the whole year, we will receive the 18 mills from the local funding. So based on that, here is my recommendation for the next fiscal year. We will collect about 13.9 million as a local revenue. The state aid, based on the 435 pupil increase, as 33.5 million. Federal revenue with all the federal grants would be 29.6 million. And the incoming transfer, which is from the WISD, as 7.5 million. As you can see, the incoming transfer is a little less because they haven't closed out the year, which we get a December payout in December from ISD. They are always, whenever we get a special ed payout, they are 2 years behind. So by December is when we will know what that payout was for 1920. So that's when when I make my amendment, is that information will be included in that. So we are expecting a total revenue of $84.7 million for the next fiscal year. Now, this does include our entire SR, remaining of the SR2 and the remaining of the entire SR3. Based on our revenue and the district needs, these are our expenses. These expenses include, if you remember, we had negotiated the teacher salaries and the steps and the increases. We had included the longevity. Any things that was negotiated, those all are included in this one. And as you can see, we are expecting excess revenue of $23,724 to add it to our fund balance. Next I have is a food service fund. We have a little less local revenue this time. We do generally provide the services to summer food, and we were not awarded the summer food. So because of that, we will have less revenue. But when you have less revenue, you have less expenses as well. So generally it goes hand in hand. It's always like a wash. It's never one versus the other. The state revenue is based on the similar what we expected this year. And the federal revenue is anticipating based on number of meals that we will be serving throughout the year. So we are expecting about $3.5 million for the revenue. The operations between the labor and next year, our food service contract changes. It's no longer a fixed cost, it's a cost reimbursable. So based on the cost reimbursable model and the labor cost, we are anticipating $3.3 million as operational expenses. We are anticipating we will be able to transfer $130,000 as indirect cost to the general fund, which gets our total expenses to be $3.5 million and allowing us to add $46,323 to the food service fund balance. The debt fund, this is for the city, for the Ypsilanti portion. We are anticipating collecting a local revenue of almost approximately $7.5 million. And we have 3 bonds that are outstanding with a total payment of $7.1 million, which will allow us to add $472,000 to our fund balance. This fund balance is only used to pay the bond. This doesn't go to anything else. So eventually you will see, once we are done paying all the bonds, outstanding bonds, there will be nothing left in that fund balance. All of that will be used to pay our debt, outstanding debt. Next, we have a below run portion of it. We are anticipating to generate $6.1 million, which means that we have to borrow $3.8 million from the treasury to make our annual payment. Our annual payment from the below run, we have 2 bonds outstanding. The total annual payment is $9.8 million, which will allow us to add the excess of $116,047 to our fund balance. Same concept applies here as well. The entire fund balance will be used to pay off each outstanding bond. As we are done with the bonds, we will make sure that the things are updated accordingly and make necessary changes that we need to make for our bonds. Last but not least, it's the student activities account. Historically, we have noticed that we generate about $125,000 as between the donation and the fundraising from the various schools. So we are expecting that as our incoming revenue for the student expenses, and pretty much the same amount as their expenses, leaving the fund balance as $290,601. The next steps for us would be during the adoption of our final budget amendment and adoption of the initial budget recommendation for the fiscal year 22-23. What questions might you have?
So that I'm understanding, Ms. Nag. So from the Ypsilanti and the Willeron debt, when you say those total revenues, these are, when we add those two together, those are the payments that we have to pay out every year.
Yes.
Correct. Okay.
Yes. And when you see the borrow line, so during our action item, you will see something called as a state bond loan action item in the meeting. That's where we borrow that money to
Okay.
make that payment.
Okay.
Any other questions, trustee Townsend?
No, thank you.
Any other board questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Nyack.
Thank you.
Next, that takes us to our public comment portion of our meeting. And at this time, I would like to ask Ms. Haynes if there are any public comment cards that have come in. Thank you, Ms. Haynes. Next, that takes us to item 6, which is our consent agenda. At this time, is there a motion?
Madam President, Vice President Lee, move that the Board of Education approve the May 9, 2022 regular board meeting minutes, personnel matters as per the presented list dated 6/20/22.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Vice President Lee. Is there support for this motion?
I support President Trustee Fields.
Thank you. Supported by Trustee Fields. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to action item under student affairs. This is the acceptance of a field trip request. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Trustee Townsend, move that the Board of Education approve the week-long field trip of the Ypsilanti Community High School Marching Band Program in August 2022 to learn the 2022 Marching Band Show.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Trustee Townsend. Is there support for this motion?
Support trustee Goodrich.
Supported by Trustee Goodrich. Any discussion on this item? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the resolution for the Michigan High School Athletic Association membership. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Trustee Gainslew, I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution for membership in the Michigan High School Athletic Association effective August 1, 2022 to July 31, 2023.
Thank you. A motion has been made by trustee Gainslew. Is there support for this motion?
Support, Vice President Lee.
Supported by Vice President Lee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to an action item under Human Resources, the approval of Director of State and Federal Programs contract. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, I move that the Board of Education approve the Director of State and Federal Programs contract of Casey Corbin with the commencement date of July 1, 2022.
Thank you. A motion has been made by trustee Gainslew. Is there support for this motion?
Support trustee Goodrich.
Supported by trustee Goodrich. Any discussion on this item?
I'd like a brief introduction on this one.
Yes, please. Superintendent Zachary Ross.
Thank you. Ms. McCarty will be presenting the candidate background information before the board takes their vote.
Thank you.
While she's coming with the details, I want to remind the board that in the SEEK grant, there is the position of the SEEK coordinator, which Dr. Coscarella will be moving to do that role over the course of these 3 years, as he's written the grant and is intimately involved with those. We met with the U.S. Department of Ed, and we must put the people in the position so that we do not lose funding on the grant. And so this candidate that Ms. McCarty, here she needs glasses, Ms. McCarty will be sharing, will be focused on the area of the grants position. However, also adding with the other SEEK position to make sure that we're cross-training everyone in these roles because we work so closely together.
Good evening, Madam President and members of the Board of Education. I would like to present to you for your review, and I'm excited to do that. Ms. Casey Corbin. She is a native Ohioan. She often jokes about being made in Ohio. She's received both her BS and her MS in Human Resource Management and Psychology from Franklin University. She's worked for nonprofit and public schools for over 20 years. Her areas of expertise include grant management and leadership. She has a passion for improving academic, social, and life skills of children, especially in diverse populations. She's committed to fostering team spirit, pride, and trust through servant leadership. Casey is married with 3 children, and in her free time, she enjoys reading and traveling and gardening.
Thank you, Ms. McCarty. Any board questions or discussion at this time?
Congratulations, Mr. Coscarella.
I will go ahead and repeat the motion and who it was supported by, and we can take a vote. The motion was made by trustee Gainslew, supported by trustee Goodrich. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations and welcome. Next, that takes us to the approval of the Human Resource Coordinator contract. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Vice President Lee, move that the Board of Education approve the Human Resource Coordinator contract of Sean Fisher with the commencement date of July 1, 2022.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Vice President Lee. Is there support for this motion?
I support trustee Fields.
Supported by trustee Fields. Any discussion on this item?
Yes, please. Can we get a little background on?
Ms. McCarty, I'm so sorry. We should have had you take a seat.
And again, this is a position that's in the SEEK grant that is really designated to look at processes and systems within our talent management program.
So Madam President and Board of Education, thank you for inviting me up once again. I would like to present for your review Sean Fisher. Sean has almost 20 years' experience working in public schools. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Toledo and a master's degree from Wayne State University, as well as an ed specialist degree from Wayne State University, and he has a graduate certificate in human resources management from Walsh College. Sean is also married and has 3 children. He is excited. He is a nonprofit board member and a small business owner and would love to join the community of Ypsilanti Community Schools.
Thank you, Ms. McCarty. Any board questions? Motion was made by Vice President Lee, supported by Trustee Fields. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations and welcome. Next, that takes us to our action item under business and finance, millage rates. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Vice President Lee, move that the Board of Education approve the millage rates of the 2022 tax rate request L-4029S as presented for Superior Township, Ypsilanti Township, in the city of Ypsilanti.
Thank you. A motion was made by Vice President Lee. Is there support for this motion?
Trustee Townsend, support.
Supported by Trustee Townsend. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the resolution for the 2021-22 final budget amendment. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Trustee Townsend, move that the Board of Education approve the attached resolution for the 2021-22 June final budget amendments.
Thank you. A motion was made by Trustee Townsend. Is there support for this motion?
Support, Vice President Lee.
Supported by Vice President Lee. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the resolution for the 2022-2023 initial budget. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Trustee Townsend, move that the Board of Education approve the attached 2022-23 general appropriations resolution.
Thank you. A motion was made by Trustee Townsend. Is there support for this motion?
Trustee Fields, I support.
Thank you. Supported by Trustee Fields. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the resolution, the state aid anticipation note. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, I move that the Board of, Trustee Gainsley, I move that the Board of Education approve the resolution authorizing the issuance of notes in anticipation of state school aid, August 2022 borrowing through Michigan Finance Authority, authorizing the issuance of up to $5 million of state aid in anticipation notes through the Michigan Finance Authority's State Aid Anticipation Program.
Thank you. A motion was made by Trustee Gainsley. Is there support for this motion?
Support, Vice President Lee.
Thank you. Supported by Vice President Lee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the SBLF resolution. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, Trustee Townsend, move that the Board of Education adopt the presented resolution to authorize the annual loan repayment activity application for the former Willow Run Community Schools.
Thank you. A motion was made by Trustee Townsend. Is there support for this motion?
Trustee Fields, I support.
Supported by Trustee Fields. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to the approval of the UKG Time for School software. Is there a motion at this time?
Madam President, I move that the Board of Education accept as presented the UKG Time for School software proposal for 100 and, oh, that's another, I thought there's no comma there, but okay. 950 dollars. We need a comma there. Okay. It's 2 periods. That's why I was confused. I was like, it makes-
Okay, thank you, trustee Fields. A motion was made by trustee Fields. Is there support for this motion?
Support, Vice President Lee.
Thank you. Supported by Vice President Lee. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next, that takes us to a pause. Before we move into our Board of Education workshop for this evening, we'd like to take a pause to give the board a break, a chance to grab a snack, do anything they need to. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Is that okay, or do we need longer? Is 10 minutes good? Sure. Okay, all right. We will be in recess until 7 o'clock.